Someone in your tribe isn't breathing anymore. They were there yesterday, hunting, laughing, sharing meat by the fire, and now they are just still. Their eyes are open, but nothing looks back. The warmth is leaving their skin. The rest of the group has gone quiet. What do you do? For the first 200,000 years of your species' existence, no one had written down the answer. No burial manual, no religious ceremony you would recognize, no grief counselor waiting at the edge of the forest. Just a body, a tribe, and a silence that sat in the air like smoke. But here is the thing. Your ancestors did something. They always did something. And the evidence they left behind, pressed into the dirt, stained into bone, buried beneath limestone, has been slowly, painstakingly decoded by archaeologists over the last century. What they found is one of the most astonishing stories in all of human prehistory. It involves a Neanderthal grave lined with wildflowers in northern Iraq, a child wrapped in thousands of ivory beads in an Ice Age village in Russia, a pit in Spain where early humans threw their dead, over and over, for generations. And one very uncomfortable question. What does it mean that your ancestors did any of this at all? The answer changes everything about who you think you are. Let's start at the very beginning, not 10,000 years ago, not even 50,000. Let's go back roughly 430,000 years to a cave system hidden in the mountains of northern Spain called Atapuerca. Inside a narrow, nearly unreachable shaft, archaeologists would later name it the Cima de los Huesos, which translates to pit of bones. Researchers discovered the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals. 28 people, piled together in a space the size of a small bedroom. These were not modern humans. They were a pre-human species, a distant ancestor older than Neanderthals, and they were deliberately placed there. There were almost no other animal bones mixed in, just these 28 bodies, arranged in a shaft that took serious physical effort to reach. Researchers like Juan Luis Arzuaga, who has spent decades excavating Atapuerca, believe this was intentional, not an accident of geography, not the remains of a predator's kill, a deliberate act. Something was being done with the dead, even before Homo sapiens existed. So the question of what ancient humans did when someone died isn't a question about modern humans alone. It's a question about something far older than our species. A behavior that stretches back almost 500,000 years, which means whatever drives it isn't just cultural. It may be biological, it may be baked into the architecture of the social brain itself. But let's focus on the chapter you would recognize most. Let's talk about Neanderthals. For most of the 20th century, scientists considered Neanderthals brutes, unintelligent, reactive, closer to animal than to human. The popular image was something between a gorilla and a caveman, hunched, grunting, incapable of symbolic thought. Then came Shanidar Cave. In the late 1950s, an American archaeologist named Ralph Selecki began excavating a cave in what is now northern Iraq. What he found at Shanidar shattered the brute theory in a single field season. Inside the cave, buried roughly 60,000 years ago, was the skeleton of a Neanderthal man. He had been severely disabled. His right arm was withered and possibly amputated at some point during his life. His eye socket showed signs of serious trauma. An analysis of his bones suggested he was partially blind and almost certainly deaf in one ear. He had survived catastrophic injury. He had survived. That alone means someone was feeding him, caring for him, carrying his weight in the group long after he could no longer carry his own. And then he died, and they buried him. Soil samples taken from around his skeleton contained dense clusters of flower pollen, 8 different plant species, several of them with known medicinal or nutritional properties. Selecki published his findings and proposed that Neanderthals had buried their dead with flowers. The image was profound. A group of prehistoric humans gathered around a grave laying wildflowers on the body of their dead. The flower burial interpretation has been contested since. Some researchers, analyzing later samples from the same site, argued the pollen clusters could have been dragged in by burrowing rodents over thousands of years. The debate is real and ongoing. But here is what nobody argues about. The man at Shanidar had survived long enough to become old and broken. Someone kept him alive. And when he died, he was placed deliberately in the earth. Whether or not there were flowers, there was intention. That intention becomes even harder to dismiss when you look at what happens roughly 34,000 years ago in a site outside the city of Vladimir in Russia, a site called Sunghir. At Sunghir, archaeologists uncovered the graves of 3 individuals, 1 adult male and 2 children buried head to head. And these graves were not simple. The adult male was found wearing what researchers estimated to be 3,000 handcrafted ivory beads, sewn into his clothing in elaborate patterns. He also had ivory armlets, a carved mammoth figure, and fox teeth arranged along his body. The children were buried together with even more ornament, thousands of beads, pendants, carved animal figures, and 2 extraordinarily long spears made from straightened mammoth tusks, each over 2 meters long. The effort required to produce those beads alone is staggering. Modern experimental archaeologists have estimated that carving a single ivory bead with stone tools takes roughly 45 minutes to an hour. 3,000 beads. That is a minimum of 2,000 hours of labor. For a burial. Not for the living, for the dead. This is not a practical act. Nobody who is purely focused on immediate survival spends 2,000 hours making beads for a corpse. Something else is driving this behavior. Something that looks, uncomfortably, like grief, like meaning-making, like the desperate human need to insist that a life mattered. Archaeologist Paul Pettit, who has written extensively on the origins of burial in his work The Paleolithic Origins of Human Burial, argues that these elaborate interments represent something profoundly new in the history of cognition. They suggest that these people held beliefs about what happened after death. They were doing something for the dead person, not just disposing of a body, but sending them somewhere. But why did they start doing any of this at all? Here is where it gets interesting, because the impulse to do something with the dead is not a behavior unique to humans, or even to hominins. Chimpanzees have been observed sitting with dead group members for hours. Elephants return to the bones of their dead and touch them carefully, repeatedly, with their trunks. Crows and ravens have been documented responding to dead members of their species in ways that look, if you are being careful, a little like mourning. The social brain, the brain evolved to track relationships, remember who helped you, and feel the weight of loss, appears to generate a response to death that goes beyond simple recognition. It keeps reaching for the absent individual. It keeps expecting them to come back. For your ancestors, death created a kind of cognitive rupture. Someone who was a fixed point in the social map simply stops appearing. That disruption had to be processed somehow. And the body, present but no longer responding, became the focus of that processing. The first burials may have been driven as much by psychological necessity as by spiritual belief. Placing the body somewhere, marking it, covering it with something, these acts may have helped the living brain accept the rupture. To close the loop, to tell the nervous system, this is finished. They are not coming back. We can stop waiting. What came after? The flowers, the beads, the spears, may be the gradual elaboration of that basic cognitive need, as minds became more complex, and culture gave new frameworks to something that had always been felt, but never before given form. It is worth pausing on one more moment. A grave that predates Sunghir by tens of thousands of years, found in a rock shelter in northern Israel called Kafsa Cave. Here, roughly 92,000 years ago, a group of early modern humans buried a child. And they did not bury the child alone. They placed the antlers of a large deer across the child's arms, intentionally, carefully, in a position that could not have happened by accident. Archaeologists like João Zilhão, who has done critical work on early symbolic behavior in both modern humans and Neanderthals, argue that choices like this, deliberate, symbolic, serving no practical purpose, are the fingerprints of a mind capable of metaphor. A mind that can look at an object and decide it stands for something else. A mind that can look at a dead child and still make a careful decision about what that child deserves. 92,000 years ago, a child, deer antlers, someone cared enough to make a choice. So what did ancient humans actually do when someone died? They stopped. They gathered. They stayed with the body longer than was strictly necessary. They made decisions, sometimes simple ones, sometimes ones that cost 2,000 hours of careful work. They placed things in the grave that had no survival value whatsoever. They marked the lives of the people they had lost, in the only way available to a mind still learning to talk about invisible things, through action, through material, through the act of pressing a memory into the dirt. And here is what that tells you about yourself. The impulse you feel right now, the weight that lands in your chest when you think about losing someone who matters, is not a modern invention. It is not a product of civilization or religion or social media or therapy culture. It is 430,000 years old, possibly older. The humans who placed their dead in the pit of bones in Spain did not have art. They did not have language as we understand it. They may not have had anything resembling a god, but they did not leave their dead behind. Neither would you. And the next time you find yourself at a graveside doing the ancient, necessary, slightly irrational work of saying goodbye to someone who can no longer hear you, know that the earliest version of you was already standing in exactly the same place. Someone in your tribe isn't breathing anymore, and for nearly 500,000 years, your ancestors always did something about it.